Can Syria deliver transitional justice? A Damascus court has sentenced Bashar Al Assad and other members of his regime to death in absentia. He's been convicted of crimes against humanity. But is that enough for a country recovering from years of war? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. Syrians have been demanding accountability for the murders, disappearances and tortures carried out by the regime of Bashar Al Assad during nearly 14 years of war. Now a court in Damascus has sentenced Assad to death in absentia along with his brother Maher and 7 other former high-ranking officials for crimes carried out during the conflict. Atef Najib, who in 2011 launched a crackdown against protesters in Deraa province that would contribute to the outbreak of war, was the only defendant in court. The verdicts are being hailed by Syria's new government as a landmark moment for justice, but they also raise difficult questions about what transitional justice should look like. So can these verdicts deliver genuine accountability? And how far will the government go in pursuing former regime officials? We'll talk to our panel of guests in just a moment. But first, this report from Victoria Gatenby.
Atef Najib was the only member of the Assad regime who was in court to hear the verdict in his trial on Tuesday. He was found guilty of crimes against humanity, murder, torture, arbitrary detention and abduction, and sentenced to death.
Combine the penalties that restrict freedom with the implementation of the most severe penalty against him, which is execution.
The court also sentenced 8 other defendants to death in absentia. They include former President Bashar Al Assad and his brother Maher, a former Syrian army commander, both found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Outside court, people celebrated the verdicts, lifting the prosecutor onto their shoulders.
I was detained by the Assad regime. They took me from my school when I was 13 years old. We cannot express our happiness. And our biggest happiness will be when Bashar Assad is executed.
But that's unlikely to happen anytime soon. Bashar and Maher al-Assad are in Russia, where they've been granted political asylum. Najib led the crackdown against anti-regime protests that erupted in Deraa province in 2011. It would lead to a war that lasted until Assad was overthrown in December 2024. More than 500,000 people were killed and millions displaced.
This is a day of justice for all the wounded, detainees and Syrians who were unjustly forced to leave their country. It's a historic day, marking a victory of right against injustice, victory of the Syrian people against the ousted regime.
Syria's justice minister says Najib must exhaust all legal appeals before he can be put to death. The other defendants remain beyond the reach of Syria's courts, making their sentences largely symbolic for now. But for many victims, the rulings represent a first step towards accountability. They say what matters most to them now is turning those verdicts into justice. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Another landmark moment in Syria. To discuss it, our guests today here on Inside Story. And joining me in the studio, Labib al-Nahhas, an analyst who focuses on Syria. Fadel Abdulghany is in Damascus. He's founder and executive director of the Syrian Network for Human Rights. And Jamal Mansour is a political scientist whose research focuses on Syria under the Assad regime. He joins us from Damascus. So let me start with you, Labib. An important moment. I think most people who've followed this very closely understand the verdict because we are well aware of the crimes that have existed in Syria for over 50 years. I think the question marks are about the process, are they not?
I think it is because let's not forget that we're coming out of almost 6 decades of crimes. And in any transitional justice process, which the one that we are involved right now or initiating, it is very complex to kick off and to adapt that process to the needs and realities of society. The trial that we witnessed yesterday and the verdict that we heard about Atef Najib carries a huge symbolic value, not because it's only the first trial, but also because of the symbolic value of the accused person himself. This is the person, basically, who initiated the crackdown that ignited the revolution. But at the same time, as you mentioned, the transitional justice is not only about criminal prosecutions, and this is the risk that we run right now, that the main focus so far, out of all the tracks that a transitional justice would have, the focus is being only on criminal trials. And this will diminish and minimize a lot the impact and the kind of benefits that the Syrian society needs out of the transitional justice process. Because let's not forget, this is going to be key, the transitional justice and the outcomes of the transitional justice, to build social peace, to bring all Syrians together and establish a certain cohesion that will allow the country to move forward.
You keep mentioning transitional justice. I'll come back to you in a moment. I want you to define that for us, because people around the world won't necessarily, unless they're lawyers and human rights experts, understand that term. So I'll come back to you in a moment on that. But Jamal, I think it's also worth taking stock of where we are in Syria's history, because remarkably, it is now only just over 20 months since Assad fell. Things have moved very, very fast, have they not?
Yes, thank you for hosting me, and thanks for Labib for putting us in this context of transitional justice. The word transitional justice itself being spoken right now, as you said, less than 24 months after the fall of the Assad regime, which in itself was almost impossible 2 years ago to imagine. To any Syrian, to anybody in the region, Assad was being rehabilitated, had no forceful, adversaries that looked like they were viable. None of the people who are now in power in Syria looked like viable alternatives 24 months ago. So yes, a lot has moved. Syrians have moved from the certainty of having no future and having things go wrong all the time to the possibility right now, for the first time in 60 years or so, of things perhaps maybe moving in the right direction. Part of which is people who were held accountable, as Labib was suggesting, and I totally agree. Atef Najib is not only important because he's a minion of the Assad regime, the head of the security, but he was the person who initiated the entire sequence of events that led to the Syrian revolt and then the Syrian conflict that ended up in a devastating war that the regime had launched against the Syrian society, which left the devastation that we are now trying to reconcile with. So him being put to trial is a very symbolic move indeed that would not have been imaginable 24 months ago. Having said that, though, that as Labib was saying, I totally agree with his contention, is far still, despite its significance, despite its symbolic, very important status for a lot of Syrians. The Syrians went out on the streets celebrating this for a reason, because this is the first time in 6 decades again that anyone at all who let their blood go out on the streets, Syrians, people's blood out on the street, was being held accountable for the first time. So it is very significant. Having said that, it is still far removed from being a process. This is, again, a tribunal that was held under Syrian penal code. He was tried as if he were a common criminal, not somebody who committed crimes against humanity or crimes of war, none of which exist in the present Syrian penal code. Not to fault the Syrian penal code, not to fault the people who tried to initiate a process of adjudicating things under a legal system. That is a good step in and of itself. But we are still ways to go to have something, A, to match the enormity of the crimes committed, and B, put them into the context where this is part of a larger process, as Labib was saying, and he's going to be presenting to us something about transitional justice, which I think he's far more capable of doing. But we are still in a very, very, very preliminary process of setting a precedent of putting people who committed these heinous crimes and destroyed all of Syria with what they've done and their political and security choices to trial. It is a very significant day indeed.
Fadel, we'll talk about your area of expertise in a moment, but behind you, the centre of Damascus, if you were to walk down to that roundabout behind you and ask people on the streets, What do they think of this development?
The normal people is feeling great, actually. So in spite everything, in spite all of our maybe legal and experience criticism toward the process, toward the verdict itself, toward the procedure, but the ordinary people here in Syria, I'm talking about the vast majority of the Syrian people, they are feeling justice, they are feeling accountability. And everyone who is like in charge in transitional justice knows very well that the court is the hard tool of the transitional justice, the accountability. Of course, it's not the only one, but it's the hard tool, actually. It's the bulldozer here. And it used to be used against those who is involved in the heinous crime, in crimes against humanity and war crimes and top leader. People here in Syria feel that the cycle of impunity is broken for the first time ever in the modern Syrian history. Especially that the verdict is targeting the highest level. We are talking about Bashar Al Assad and also Atef Najib, also Mohammed Shaar, who is also including in process. Here we are talking about the top 50 or 20 of the Syrian authority. So there is a lot of chanting, dancing, singing, protesting, lots of like meals is going on, sweet, dessert everywhere, and I feel that not only in Deraa, especially in Deraa, but not only in Deraa actually, and this is the feeling of, and that's actually the aim of the those tools, of the transitional justice tools, is to eliminate the feeling of anger. We need the people to prevent the people to take revenge from their own hand. How to achieve that? Why at the same? Because we have like tens of thousands who is involved in crimes against humanity. So we need to execute all of those, or held accountable, or building a case against all of those. We don't have ability as a state, or economic ability, or strategic ability. So for sure, we need to use this impact to eliminate the feeling of angerance. What is the most important tool is the court and the verdict.
Okay, Labib, we keep mentioning transitional justice, and two other guests have mentioned it. It's originally, I think, something that came from the UN Secretary General in 2004, the term. And according to the UN now, there are 4 pillars. One is the criminal justice, the bit we've just had, but also truth-seeking, reparations, and guarantees of non-recurrence.
Correct.
This is just one piece of this difficult path for Syria, is it not?
Absolutely. As Jamal was mentioning, this is just really the beginning of the whole process. Transitional justice, just to put it in layman terms, is really a multifaceted, multi-tracked process that is normally initiated in societies that went through dictatorship, crimes against the society itself, into a new state, basically, and that's where the name transitional comes from. And as you mentioned, it is multi-tracked. So what we witness right now is only the prosecution, basically, the criminal prosecution. But the purpose, the final purpose of transitional justice is not just to establish accountabilities. It's really to lay the foundation for the society to heal, to gain certain cohesion, and be ready to move to a more stable and steady society. Right now, the problem that Jamal mentioned, which is a key problem that has not been solved in Syria, is the fact that we are taking people to trial based on the regime's laws themselves. Transitional justice, in order to succeed, it requires 2 things, amongst others. One, it needs an independent body or commission with enough powers in order to fulfill its mandate. The other thing, a very specific legal framework that will empower that body to go after the criminals and to perform the other tracks that we mentioned to its completion. Right now, that framework, that legal framework, does not exist. It's true that the parliament has been like frozen in a way for 9 months, but that framework needs to be approved and needs to be immediately put into action, because those laws, again, as the name transitional justice indicates, are going to be transitional. So once the operation is completed, we're going to go back to normal laws in the country.
Jamal, of the main defendants, only one actually there in court.
I disagree with that.
So very quickly, Fadel, yes, go ahead.
Actually, I disagree, and I wrote a paper about that. We cannot wait until that there is a law issued by the parliament. Maybe this will take 1 or 2 years. The verdict and the court can proceed before that. In spite that we don't have law, we can merge those two laws based on the custom law and the Syrian law. And I wrote a research paper about that, and we issued a report about that, how we can do it. It didn't do it well. The court didn't do it well, but it can do. And I think it's good. Still, there is, of course, it can rectify itself, but I disagree that also this is the only one tool is working. There is some sort of reformation that happened in security forces apparatus, which, like the majority, is being dismantled and restructured again. It's happened also in the justice ministry, and I'm training the judge, I'm training the lawyer. Still not as what we need. Still a lot of work being done, but there is some actually. So it's not only the prosecution process which is going on in Syria.
Okay. Let me bring Jamal back in. Jamal, we have the main defendants, Bashar Al Assad and his brother Maher, not there in court. Yes, found guilty. Yes, sentenced to death. But they're in Moscow. That's the big problem. Tell me, what do we know about their life in Moscow? And also, perhaps quickly tell me, everyone knows who Bashar Al Assad is. Who is Maher Al Assad?
Thank you for this question. I wish I knew what Bashar was up to. The latest was information by the Israelis, of all people. I think Haaretz had a very interesting scoop on Bashar's life after being removed from power and living in Moscow. He's not doing too badly. He's not living too shabby a life. The money that he fleeced out of the Syrian economy went into investments in real estate. He lives his life going from luxury restaurant to luxury restaurant, low key, doesn't have much of a retinue, but he doesn't also keep his profile that high. He does not have the ability to talk to media yet. The Russians are keeping him on the hush-hush. Bashar al-Assad is the dictator, the head of the dictatorial regime of Hafez al-Assad, which was bequeathed upon him as the first male heir. Maher, however, was the head of the draconian 4th Armored Brigade of the Republican Guard. That was the crack draconian guard of the Assad regime. This was the one part of the Syrian army that did not splinter into free Syrian army cells that then went into militias and so on and so forth. The entire Syrian army had disbanded except for the 4th Armored Brigade, which was the best equipped, which was the best trained, which was the best paid, the best fed of all of the Syrian army throughout its life, especially through the Syrian Revolution and the crackdown on it. The head of that crackdown was the 4th Republican Guard, the Republican Guard's 4th Armored Brigade, and head of that was Maher al-Assad. He was one of the people who had a key role in ordering, but also executing some of the worst stages of the Syrian conflict. For example, the siege and bombardment of Deraa and Madamiyah that was done by the crack 4th Armored Brigade, the siege and hungering, the siege and the famine induced by complete cutting off of Madaya and Zabadani during 2016 and 2017 was done by the 4th Armored Brigade. So Maher al-Assad, while Bashar al-Assad assumes the legal, political, but also military responsibility as the nominal head of the armed forces in Syria under the presidential system that existed back then, Maher al-Assad is the actual person with the hand hand on the trigger, who actively did these things. He was also seen in vicinity of these places. He ordered the purchase of arms. He ordered the bombardment of cities entire, and his forces, after the battles had subdued, when the regime in 2018 had finally subdued Ghouta, surrounding Damascus, after it had also, through its allies, Russia and Iran, subdued Aleppo in 2016, started to become more and more actively and overtly implicated in the drug trade. The Captagon trade was entirely Maher Al Assad's game. He used to kick back to Bashar and to other regime bosses, but it was his forces that oversaw the production, the protection of, and the transfer of these drug trade that was going on, that was giving headaches to everybody in the region.
So if I can stop you there, Jamal, I mean, he now, along with his brother, the former president, faces the death penalty. Labib, that is significant, isn't it, the death penalty, because some other suspects are in the European Union. Sure. Some have already been found guilty in a number of cases in the European Union, and European Union countries do not support the death penalty. Isn't there a problem going forward that this will actually obstruct justice in some other cases, that European countries won't want to send suspects to Damascus? I'm also told there is the UN body that was set up in 2016, the International Impartial and Independent Mechanism. The UN doesn't agree with the death penalty, and that's the evidence bank for a lot of this. Maybe the UN now will have difficulty cooperating with the government in Damascus. Is there not a problem going forward?
It is, but just before I get to your question, just a quick follow-up on what Fadel mentioned. I agree with him in terms that you don't, having a specific legal framework for transitional justice is not the only way to move forward. You can reform existing laws, correct, but I was talking in general as an ideal path. There has to be, because, for example, in the Syrian law right now, crimes against humanity is not something that has been contemplated before. So it is not the only way, but it's like the preferred way.
In terms of the death penalty,
so exactly. The problem is not actually, ironically, is not only going to be with the Europeans or the United Nations, etc. Actually, Russia itself, because there is an agreement between Syria and Russia that was signed, ironically, by Assad in 2022, which an agreement of extradition and judicial cooperation that forces each country to hand over people of interest if they have penalties superior to 1 year, which is the case, of course, of Bashar. So, but that process is conditioned with guarantees of not being sentenced to death. So right now, in the case of Russia or in the case of Europe and other organizations, there's slightly a political decision that the Syrian authorities will have to make. Whether they're going to go ahead with what the people want, which is, of course, the death sentence for the vast majority of the Tier 1 and Tier 2 ex-regime officers, or they will think about it from another perspective, which is these people or these persons of interest, they can provide a lot of information, insight, and at the same time, probably they could provide a much better kind of outlook and optics to the whole process.
Fadel, in terms of Russia, is there any way you think that Russia will give up Assad and those close to him? And what leverage does the Syrian government have? Because the Syrian government's just done a deal to let Russia keep its military bases in Syria. Didn't it have more leverage before it did that deal?
I don't want to raise the victim expectation. I don't think Russia will extradite Bashar al Assad at all, or even Maher al Assad. They will keep them as a political card in their hand. At the same time, the execution verdict itself, it's a little bit controversial. But like we offered something to the court, and I discussed that with the head of the court and the prosecutor as well, that we have a little bit in a mediation or a middle solution, that in between the abandon the execution itself, the execution sentence, or leave it as it is. In the between, and in this transitional period, I think we can confine the execution against only the top ranking, those who is involved in crimes against humanity and war crimes, and against those only in this period. So it's not against any other Syrian in this period, and it will not be extended after this period. So it will target only those. So this is a mediation. But what is the court failed in this regard? Actually, we are moving very fast in Syria in those courts. There is no. I agree about the preparation. So even if we need to merge the international law and the domestic law, this needs preparation. That means discussion between the expert and the court itself to prepare themselves. They didn't happen. It's moving swiftly.
Okay, Labib, is it moving too fast, would you say? And is there a role for international players in this as well? We have the International Criminal Court. Syria could sign up to that. It hasn't. And of course, the International Criminal Court has its own big problems right now. Briefly, if you can.
I think we're not moving too fast because there is a popular demand and we're coming close to the second year of after the toppling of the regime. And as Fadel said, which I agree with him, the preparations required are massive. And unfortunately, I think the Syrian Authority has not had the chance to do them yet. So basically, we have to move what we have. I don't think that there's going to be any foreign involvement or non-Syrian involvement at this point in time, because, for the same reason that we mentioned before, that the Syrian authorities are not ready yet to open up and establish these kind of cooperations, although they're trying to do it right now. In the meantime, I think they're trying to keep the process a Syrian process and the decision a Syrian decision because A, this is what the people are asking for, and B, going back to the case of Bashar Assad, it's a Pandora box. And I'm sure that a lot of regional countries, international countries or governments don't want to open that box yet, and probably the Syrian government itself is not ready to do it. So I think they're going to go in a conservative way. They have a considerable list of ex-regime commanders that have been arrested, and soon they will be in trial. So I think they will follow that path for now.
Thank you very much, Labib, Nahhas, Fadel, Abdulghany and Jamal Mansour, our guests today on Inside Story. For further context and analysis on the new Syria and details of its grim past, remember to visit our website, aljazeera.com. We'd love to hear from you too. Go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Alternatively, we're on X. There, find us at AJ Inside Story. For me, James Bays, and the team here. That's it for now. Stay tuned. Al Jazeera's coverage never stops, and the latest from around the world in just a moment.